that video, my daughter found that video. She said, Dad, this is, because she had heard some of the things I was going to preach about this morning. She says, that sounds like it would fit in perfectly with your lesson this morning, and it really does. See, because the idea that's presented by that video, we can laugh at it, and they did a really good job with it, I think. But it's also true. That's the sad part about it, is that each and every one of us, as we're sitting there laughing and enjoying that, somewhere in the back of our mind, we're realizing that's really true. The human condition is that we will never be satisfied. We cannot be satisfied. No matter what we've got, no matter how much we have, we always want more. The idea is that as people begin to accumulate stuff in this country, there's no end to what they want. The American dream is such a unique thing. You know, this nation was blessed by God, or maybe not, depending on how we look at what has happened to that blessing. We have more wealth than any other nation on earth. Even today, we still have more wealth than just about any other nation on earth. There may be a few nations that have more money, but in terms of the middle class and what have you, we are the most blessed nation on earth. And there really doesn't seem to be any limit to what we can get out of life. We can get more and more and more and more and more. I thought about computers. I remember when I bought my first computer. It was a Linus 386 SX. It was fast. And it could do things. It could play Tetris, which was my favorite thing to do on the computer, still is. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't good enough. Then they had the 486. And so we had to go out and dump this old, obsolete computer that we've had for 7 months and get this new 486 computer that would play Tetris faster and process Word documents faster. And it had a bigger random access memory, and so you could put more programs on it. And then they went to bigger and better, and it seemed like every year your computer was obsolete. You know, you'd buy it, and you'd load some programs on it, and you'd use it for a while, and then it would stop working, or it would start to get slow, and you'd take it to the store and say, my computer's a little bit messed up, and they'd say, oh, you're not going to be able to fix this, you're going to need a new computer. And so we'd dump the old one, and we'd buy a new one. Anybody with me on this? Am I the only one who did that? Maybe I am. But we went through a lot of computers in our household. And then a funny thing happened. Technology spread to the phone industry. And all of a sudden that mobile phone that you used to have that was the size of a brick became a smartphone. And all of a sudden you could do everything on your phone that you could do on a computer. You can get emails, you can have Word located on it. I mean, just a bunch of stuff, right? And isn't it funny that since the society has moved towards chasing the best cell phone out there, that the pressure on computers has gone to the point where you don't dump your computer every 6 months to a year anymore. Now you upgrade it. And I've had the same laptop now for 2 or 3 years, and I hate it because the keys stick on it, but it still works, and there's no reason to upgrade it because it still has the most current stuff on it that you can buy if you were to go buy a new one. And what happened? Well, what happened is they figured out we wanted more and more and more, so they put it into the phones, and now what do? Every 6 months you get a note from your cell phone carrier saying, you want to upgrade? We'll give you a $25 discount, or we'll give you a $50 discount, or $0 down. That's the big thing now. You can get an upgraded phone for $0 down. Well, zero, that's like nothing, right? So let's go get a new phone. And $0 down, but what they don't realize is it's $600 spread out over the next 12 months. So while you pay $0 down now, your phone bill goes up $50 a month for the next year. During which time they send you another notice saying, wouldn't you like to upgrade? And why do they do that? Because they hate us? No, they do it because we demand it. Because we demand more and more and more and more and more. And that's our society. That's the American society. There are lots of cultures around the world. I've been around the world, so I can say this with some degree of authority. There are lots of cultures around the world that don't exist like that. There are lots of cultures around the world where when they get something, they expect to keep it for a lot of years. And so they take real good care of it. And they know that it has to last them for a lot of years because they might not ever be able to have the resources to replace whatever that thing is. There are a lot of cultures around the world that aren't fixated on a new stereo or a new TV or a new cell phone or a new computer or a new tablet or whatever. They're just worried about where their next meal is coming from. And so I think we need to stop for a few minutes and think about what we're doing at Christmas time. Now, I've told you this statistic, and I've told you it a lot because I want to get it inside your head. Until it gets inside my head, it's not real. Someone can say to me, well, blah, 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 and it's not real until it finally sinks in, and I go, wow, and then I start saying blah, 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 and all of a sudden it's real. And so that's why I keep telling you, 50 billion. Say that with me. 50 billion. Say it again louder. 50 billion. $50 billion is what we will spend on Christmas this year in this country. Not throughout history. This year on Christmas. Now, if we took that $50 billion that we're going to spend on Christmas this year and we gave it away to people that are hungry, we could solve hunger for over a third of the people in the world. In the entire world now. We're not talking about in our little bitty town of Johnson Creek or Watertown or Fort Atkinson or wherever, Reeseville, other places. We're talking about in the world. What if by giving away one Christmas, we could solve the hunger problem for 1 out of every 3 children who will die this year from starvation? Would that make us look at that lust for a bigger flat panel TV just a little bit different? Would it make our lust for the newest, fanciest car just a little bit different? Would it make our lust for that greatest watch or that newest tablet or that upgraded phone or those really nice clothes, would it make it just a little bit different if we knew that the money that we are spending this year on Christmas could save children's lives? See, until we put it in those kinds of relative terms, we don't connect the dots. We don't see what my lust for more has to do with starvation and poverty around the world until we start to connect the dots. And Jesus did this probably better than anyone else in Matthew chapter 6, beginning in verse 19. He's talking about this very thing. And he probably, knowing that he's Jesus and he knows everything, he's God, he knows the end from the beginning, he was probably writing about us today when he said this. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Man, is that not a description of America today? All the materialism that we've got. If you go out in the parking lot right now, you're going to see some new cars out there. They're shiny and they're new. And you can walk around them and they look really nice, right? And then go walk across the street to my car, which is a 2006 minivan, and remember that that car 7-8 years ago was nice, new, and shiny, just like a couple of these cars in our parking lot. But now it's got rust on it. Now it's got dents on it. Now there are things on it that are wearing out. If you open the door, you'll find out that the panel that controls the power seats and power windows in my car has been kicked away and it's just kind of hanging there and flopping. What happened? Well, I let the youth borrow it. That's what happened. They destroyed my van. No, they didn't. The reality is it wears out. It wears out. It rusts. I've got some rust spots on it. Not many, but a few. It wears out. It's got 140,000 miles on it. When the transmission went out this last summer, and it cost me a couple of grand to get a new transmission put in it. And at the time that I was doing that, one of the people that was consulting me said, you'd better trade it in. It's not worth putting another $2,000 into. He had that mindset that newer is better, and don't repair what you've got. Go just buy new. See, Jesus said when you store up treasures on earth, they depreciate. Even our bodies. You know, I know people who spend hundreds, literally hundreds of dollars a month trying to keep their body young and healthy. Now, I'm not against living as well as you can live, but it can become an obsession where you got a health club membership and you got dietary supplements and you got vitamins, and none of that stuff is wrong in and of itself. But if you're worshiping your body to try and keep your body young and healthy, I've got news for you. You're losing the battle because you live in a depreciating asset. Our bodies were not made to last forever. They won't last forever. We can spend tens of thousands of dollars on them, and some people do on plastic surgery and liposuction and other procedures, LASIK surgery and all these other things, and yet the body still wears out. And so Jesus, a very wise person, the God incarnate, said, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. And even the idea, for yourselves. See, when we buy that flat panel TV, and I've got one, I'm as guilty as anybody else. Listen, when I'm talking to you, I've said before, I love it when you come up and you say, oh, Jim, that sermon was just for me this morning. In the back of my mind, I'm laughing, saying, you're nuts. It was for me. Most of my sermons are things God's convicting me of. And I just bring it to you and share that with you. It's kind of like my version of reality television. See, we're storing up these things for ourselves. When have I shared my flat panel television with the unsaved world? When have I shared the extra meat that I've got sitting in my upright freezer downstairs in my basement with the unsaved world? When have I taken that brand new car, that nice new car that's shiny and doesn't have any rust and all the stuff works on it, and shared that with the unsaved world? It's not about them, it's about me. It's about me. It's about what I want. It's about satisfying me. It's about making me feel good. It's about making me feel valuable and worth something. And isn't it amazing that Jesus gave us this very instruction 2,000 years ago, and we still haven't figured it out? He said, look, don't lay up treasures on earth for yourself. Because they're going to wear out, they're going to depreciate, and they're never going to satisfy you. Well, if he left us hanging there, we'd be say, okay, so I'm not, but what? Well, Jesus didn't stop there. Jesus said, but store up for yourself treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. Now, he said, instead of storing up treasures on earth that rust and wear out and people steal them, why not store up some treasures in heaven where there ain't no rust and there ain't no moths? That's why I know there won't be mosquitoes in heaven. And thieves don't break in and steal. And again, if you don't understand what's happening, you kind of scratch your head and say, well, you know, E.F. Hutton says, there is no mutual fund account in heaven. I can't go down to my investment counselor and say, look, you know, I want to take that money that we were putting in gold or in growth stocks, or maybe I bought a CD with it, or I've got it in a passbook savings account, and I want to take that out and I want to open a spiritual bank account in heaven. That doesn't exist. And so because we're human and we tend to think in human terms, we go, well, how can you store up treasures in heaven? How can I take my flat panel and get that into heaven? How can I get this treasure and put it in heaven? And what we have to understand is the problem is we think treasure is treasure, and it isn't treasure, it's junk. See, when Jesus is talking about storing up treasures, he's talking about the idea that we need a new idea of treasure. What really is treasure? Now, many of us in here this morning, we have families. And if you don't have a biological family, if you're a believer, we're all your family, so you have family here this morning. You're part of us. And I bet that if I were to come down and say to you, look, do you value your girlfriend or your TV? Or do you value your husband or your new car? Or do you value your child or your new house? And if I could go through that, if you weren't being sarcastic or funny, you'd all say, no, my house, I would never trade my child for my house. I would never trade my girlfriend for my flat panel television set. I can always get another television set. See, we need a new definition of what treasure is. When we think about what treasure really is, we can come up with the right answer. Treasure is people. Relationships. That's what treasure is. The wealthiest person isn't the guy with the most money. The wealthiest person is the guy with the best relationships. The most and best relationships. That's in the Bible too, in Proverbs. It talks about that very thing about loving others so that you'll get love back and you'll be wealthy. And so the idea that Jesus is laying down here is that we need a new definition of treasure. What is treasure? Treasure is people. Treasure is relationships. And that's where we can have a spiritual investment. See, I've talked a lot about the idea that believers can be destiny changers. Those of us who have made Jesus the Lord of our life, we can literally be destiny changers. See, we can change people's destinies by sharing with them the love of Jesus Christ. When I share with a neighbor or friend, when I reach out to them in love, when I take them a meal when one of them is in the hospital, or I go over and help them change a tire at 20 degrees when nobody else is around, or when I just console them when things aren't going well for them, I build a relationship. And over time, that relationship comes to the point where they say to me, why are you different from everybody else? And I get to share Jesus Christ with them. And if I do it in a loving and gentle way, not being proud and pompous, but literally telling them about the grace that I've received. Remember we talked about grace last week? They come to receive Jesus as their Lord and Savior, and their destiny is changed forever, and that's treasure in heaven. That's treasure in heaven. And so when Jesus says, don't get caught up in the pursuit of materialism on this earth because it rusts, it corrupts, it gets stolen. Instead, invest in the treasure of heaven. He's talking about taking our eyes off of things and putting them on people. And when we start to go into those big commercial stores on Black Friday, and instead of looking at all the stuff, we start looking at the people, a light comes on and we begin to realize how needy they really are. And somewhere in there we get to realize how needy we are. And so Jesus said these words. He said, look, don't pursue the treasure of this world. It won't last. It wears out. It goes away. And plus you're going to die someday and leave it to somebody else who won't do with it what you would have wanted them to do with it. And the real dilemma is what he gives us in verse 21. He says, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Now, I've said this before. This verse is a cool verse because what it says is, my heart follows my treasure, not the other way around. So if you want to change your heart, move your treasure. It's just that simple. If you want to change your heart, move your treasure. If you want your heart to be a heart that follows God, move your treasure right over next to God. And then your heart will follow God. Matter of fact, do more than that. Give your treasure to God. And as you give your treasure to God, your heart follows as well. It's kind of hard to hide from Jesus' words here because each one of us knows somewhere within our heart, if we're willing to admit it, that we are eaten up with the idea that we want more and more treasure. Jesus didn't stop there. He kind of indicates here that living is an investment. We don't spend money, we invest money. You don't spend money on a movie, you invest money on a movie. You don't spend money on a piece of appliance, you invest money on a piece of appliance. And what Jesus is saying is, don't invest your money in depreciating assets. I remember that because as a financial advisor many years ago, I used to tell people that. When you put your money in a savings account that makes less than inflation, your money's depreciating and you're investing your money in a depreciating asset. When you invest your money in cars, you are investing in a depreciating asset. And so we talked about investing money in things that appreciate, they don't depreciate. What Jesus is talking about here is the idea that our life is not just about spending time. We're not spending time here. Even this morning, you're not spending time here. You're investing your life in something. The question is, what are you investing your life in? Are you investing your life in something that will last for eternity, or are you investing your life in something that will only last as long as you're here, and then it's gone? Turning over to Luke chapter 12. There's a story that I read when I was very young, when I was 8 or 9 years old. And believe me, when you're 8 or 9 years old, this is probably not one of those stories that you should be reading. See if I got the right one here. Starting in verse 13, it says, someone in the crowd said to him being Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now remember, a couple of weeks ago we had the story of the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan, and how, or I mean not the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, and how the prodigal son demanded that his dad give him half his inheritance, right? Or whatever his portion was. And so Jesus replied, "Dude, or man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist of the abundance of his possessions." And so Jesus is again talking about the idea of investment versus spending. What you do with your resources will be an investment, not an expenditure. You will invest that money. Will you invest that money in something that grows, or will you invest that money in something that dies? That's the question. And he goes on to tell this story. And he told them this parable. "The ground of a certain rich man produced good crops. Yea me, my farm is paid off. I have a bumper crop. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns, and I'll build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." And I would say that's where most of us live. We don't want to admit it. See, it's easier to judge the rich man because anybody who has more than me is rich. No, I'm not rich. I'm Jim. No, I'm not rich. I'm poor. I don't have a lot of money. But since you make more money than me, you're rich. So this passage I'm about to read, it's for you, not for me. We do that. We do that. That's why I told you about the $50 billion that we will spend on Christmas this year that could solve the hunger for a third of the children in the world that will die of hunger this year. So this guy is being blessed, he thinks. How many of us have gotten a pay raise at work or a promotion? Or maybe we got some money in a surprise deal, or we made a really good sale on a house or a car and we got a bunch of money and we go, wow, God has really blessed me. Thank you, God. Maybe not. Maybe Satan did that because he knows where your heart is and he knows what you're going to do with that money. In your pursuit and lust for more, you're going to go out and buy a bigger house or a newer car or a bigger investment or spend it all on yourself. You're not going to feed the hungry. You're not going to help the poor. You're not going to do good things for others. You're going to... And all of a sudden, it doesn't become a blessing. It becomes a curse. So this guy, it looks like he's been blessed. His crops are good. His ground was fertile. He had a bumper crop so big that he couldn't even hold it. And he's going, man, I need to build bigger barns and get all this stuff in. And everybody's going to see me and they're going to know that God has blessed me. Yay, me. And then we'll just have a big party and we'll just enjoy life because, man, finally we've gotten over the top. Finally we've gotten to the point where we will not be able to outlive our food supply. And so he says, we'll take life easy and we'll eat, drink, and be merry. And isn't that where we all want to be? We all want to get to the point in our life where we can just take it easy. We all want to get to that point in our life where we don't have to stress out every day about going to work and making a buck so we can pay our bills. Listen to what happens here. But God said to him. Now the word but there is a conjunction, and it really is a way of undoing what just got done. So when we look at this guy whose ground of a certain rich man was really good and he had a bumper crop and he decided to build new barns and he'd have more places to store his food, it clearly was not from God because of that word but right there. And he says, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God. Now, by the looks on some of your faces, you probably didn't even know that scripture was in there. You probably never read that before. Probably never thought about what does that have to do with the way that I spend my money. What does that have to do with the pursuits that I have and what I choose to do to make me happy? And now you're looking at this and you're going, wow. This was Jesus talking, and he's saying this guy thought he had it made. He thought God had blessed him. God hadn't blessed him. Satan blessed him so that he would stay further from God. He wasn't thinking about eternal things. He wasn't thinking about storing up treasures in heaven. He was thinking about storing up treasures on earth for himself. And God pronounced judgment on him. God said, you're a fool. We can go over to Proverbs, and it says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. When you live for the resources of today, when you live for all that this life can offer you, when you go for the gusto because you only get one chance in life, you are denying God. You are saying, this is all there is. I better get as much of it as I can. You are a fool. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And so this man is saying by his lifestyle, there's no God. There's no accountability for tomorrow. I can just do whatever I want to please me and glutton myself and make myself wealthy and indulge myself, and there's no penalty for it. And God said, you are a fool. When we live for the things of this world, and we forget that God has blessed us not so we can indulge ourselves, but so that we can bless the world. The stuff that He has given us, He's given us so we can bless the world. When we start to think about that, it ought to give us pause to say, what am I spending my money on? What am I spending my life on? What is it that I'm pursuing in my life that's more important than pursuing God? Am I going to be like this rich man who thought he was being blessed by God, and so he took all the blessing and he just stored it up, made it bigger, and all of a sudden God said, dude, I'm taking you out tonight. And when you get here, you're not going to be real happy with what I have to say. That scripture haunts me. It's haunted me for 50 or 55 years now. As I've thought about what would it be like for God to say that to me, you fool, tonight your life will be required of you. And then all that stuff that you've accumulated, what will it matter? Well, there's just one more thought. And that's found over in 1 John, kind of flipping through the New Testament a little bit. And in 1 John is a cool little book. If you want something to read this week, take out 1 John. It's really short. It's like 6 pages. You can read it in about 15 minutes, 20 if you're slow like me. It's about Christian living. It's about what a true believer looks like. It's pretty interesting. And so we start with this idea that Jesus says, look, you need a new definition of treasure. You need to stop investing in treasure that will rust and corrode and be stolen, and instead invest in treasure that is forever and permanent and won't rust and won't corrode and can't be stolen. Then we go over and we hear about this guy who thought he was being blessed by God because he had all this stuff. And so he just got more and more stuff because he thought he was being blessed by God. He thought, well, that's the purpose of this blessing, that I can just have more and more and more and enjoy my life even more and more and more. And God said, you're a fool. you're actually living in denial of me. You think there's no eternity. You think the only thing that is real is what you see here. And now we go over into 1 John chapter 2 and verses 16 and 17. And in verses 16 and 17, and actually I think I'll read 15 as well. It says, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." Wow. If anyone loves the world or the things of the world, the love of the Father is not in him. You know what's going on here? I preached a sermon a few months back, and I'm really convinced that most of you missed what I said. And so I'm going to say it again because I really want to hammer home this point. In the Bible it says the first commandment is, "You will have no other gods before me." Okay? And in our minds, we immediately set up a pecking order. We can't have any gods before God. So God is God number one. But then my spouse is God number two. And my job is God number three. And my home is God number four. And we go on and on and on. We say, well, those gods aren't in front of God. God's number one. And what God really meant there was, I don't want any other gods in my presence. He didn't mean I want to be number one. He meant I want to be everything. I want to be all of it. How many times have I heard people say God first, family second, business third? Makes me sick. Spoken idolatry right there. God never wants to be first and then your business second. He wants to be the God of you. He wants to be the God of your business. He wants to be the God of your family. He wants to be the God of everything in your life. And He doesn't want any other gods in the area. He wants them gone. That's what it means to say, don't have any other gods before me. It doesn't mean that you can have God number 3 and 4 that are lower than God number 1. It means no other gods. Well, now John says here, do not love the world or the things of the Lord, because anyone who loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Do you see what's happening? This is a restatement of the first commandment. You can't love two masters. Jesus said that in Matthew 7. If I had continued on reading about the laying up treasures in heaven, that's the very next verse. It says, no one can serve two masters. Either he will love one and hate the one, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You can't serve both God and money. See, you can't have two gods. God won't share himself with anyone. You can't give him half your heart. You can't give him half your life. He'll spit it back at you. He'll say, look, if you don't want to give me all of your life, just keep it. Enjoy yourself, because you only have a few short years. And then you and I will have a talk, and it won't go so well for you. If you love the world or the things of the world, the love of God is not in you. He goes on to say, for everything in the world. Get this, everything in the world. Now, when I read the word everything and I look that up, it means everything. Everything in the world, the cravings of the sinful man, the lust of his eyes, and the boasting of what he has and does, comes not from the Father, but from the world. And we just established that the world is not of God. So all these things that you're feeling good about and you're boasting about and you're collecting and trying to get more of, they're not of God. Stop thanking God for the blessings in your life that take you further from Him. Those aren't blessings, those are curses. They look like blessings because our minds are warped. We're chasing materialism. The world and its desires pass away, but the man who does the will of God lives forever. And John, in that one little sentence, boils down everything we just read about Jesus. Jesus talking about laying up treasures in heaven versus laying treasures on earth. We talk about the rich man who accumulates all this stuff, and then God calls him to the end of his life. And now John lays it all out here when he says, the world and its desires pass away. That's the treasures on earth that rust and corrode and get stolen. But the man who does the will of God, he understands what heavenly treasure is. He understands what it means to invest in heaven rather than invest on this earth. It says that the man who does the will of God lives forever. When you're on that treadmill in the morning, or if you're out jogging around the neighborhood, or you're doing your setups, or you're drinking your vitamin water, or you're taking your vitamin pills, or you're stirring up that compound that's supposed to be good for you, right? As you're doing all that stuff, think about, why are you doing it? Why are you doing it? If you're doing it just to extend your life, just so that you won't get a cold, or you won't have excess fat, or whatever, then I would submit that maybe you got your treasure in the wrong place. If you're doing it because you want to give your best to God, and you're truly living out your life to give your life away to God, man, go for it. Spend a few extra seconds on that treadmill or whatever. But can any of us say that? Can any of us say that that's the real reason we're taking such good care of our bodies, is because we want to be there when Jesus says go? When he says jump on the way up, we ask how high? I'm not saying there aren't anyone there. I'm not saying there's no one like that. I'm just saying, is that you? Be honest with yourself. Is that you? Is that why you're doing it? Or is there an ulterior? I want to continue to look good. I want to fit into my clothes. I want people to look at my figure. I don't want people to put me down. I want to live forever. Well, John gives us the solution for it right here. He says, but the man who does the will of God lives forever. See, we started out the service with the Advent reading, and Sean and Rachel White, a couple of our newest members here, young leaders in our church, read about the idea that maybe honoring God doesn't have to do with making a decision to do good. Because for most of us, I would bet, I know almost everybody in the room, most of us do good. But maybe the question is, are we doing what's best? See, the choice is not between many times the choice isn't between what's doing what's right and what's doing what's wrong. Most of the time, that's an easy one. The choice is between doing what's good and doing what's best. Mary and Martha were hosting Jesus and his friends at a dinner, and Martha was in the kitchen doing all the work, and Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet listening to him weave stories and parables and stuff and talk about treasure in heaven. And finally, Martha had had enough, and she walked into the living room and she says, Jesus, make her get up and help me in the kitchen. I need some help. And Jesus said to Martha, Mary has chosen the greater thing. Not that what you're doing is wrong, Martha. You're not a horrible person because you're in the kitchen making food for us. But Mary has chosen the greater thing. She didn't choose the good thing. She chose the best thing. And because of that, her reward is not going to be taken away from her. That's what we see right here. The one who does the will of God lives forever. Your reward will not be taken away from you. I plead with you this holiday season. This is the best time of the year to think about the choices we make and the motive behind those choices. What inspires us to do whatever we do? If your inspiration is to make your life better, to have more, to feel better about yourself, to show off to the neighbors, to let your dad and mom know that you really did make it, or your sons and daughters know that they're never going to make it to where you did, I would submit that you're probably laying up treasures on earth, where moths and rust deteriorate it and thieves break in and steal it. But if you're asking God this holiday season, how can I take all this wealth that you've given me, and instead of spending it on myself and engorging myself, how can I make that an eternal investment? How can I be a destiny changer? How can I take the wealth that you've given me, with the message of hope that you've given me and spread it throughout the world so that others glorify and praise you. I would suggest that if you're there, you're laying up treasures in heaven. We've got a resource table in the back. It's the Advent Conspiracy resource table. You should stop by there before you leave. There are ways for you to take your wealth this year and make an eternal investment. There are ways for you to take the wealth that you have this year and make an eternal investment. Spend less this year. You'll be so less stressed if you don't have to worry about getting a tie for Uncle Ray and getting socks for Grandpa and getting slippers for Dad and that right blouse for the girl or the right toy for the kids. All that stuff that just wears us out. Stop doing it. Instead, take that wealth and make an eternal investment. Make it a goal this year that instead of making somebody happy for Christmas this year, change someone's destiny. If it were not possible, Jesus would not have said to us, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and rust do not corrupt and where thieves do not break in and steal. I hope that this holiday season you will spend less. And you'll be amazed at how your stress and your anxiety and your worry starts to go down, and the joy of Christmas, the real meaning, the birth of our Savior, starts to come up.